Good evening. I'm AJ Kakkar. I'm a crossbench peer clinical academic, and it's my very great pleasure to welcome you to this Foundation for Science and Technology meeting on a really important topic, which we're very privileged to be able to host, and that is to explore the lessons that we might learn from the vaccine programme for UK life sciences more broadly. And I'm joined this evening by the Minister, Nadhim Zahawi, requires no introduction at all, but he is the Minister for COVID vaccine deployment. Professor Dame Sarah Gilbert, who's Professor of Vaccinology in the Nuffield Department of Medicine at the University of Oxford, and Steve Bates, who's Chief Executive of the BioIndustries Association. I'd like to welcome all three of our participants this evening. I'm also a trustee of the foundation, but actually the meeting would, under normal circumstances, have been chaired by Lord Willetts, who is our chairman. But regrettably this evening he's unable to join us at the last moment, but he's speaking in the House of Lords and responsible for some amendments at committee stage in the skills and post-16 education bill, where he of course has a remarkably important contribution to make, and he sends his apologies. So on a day when many of the restrictions in England have been lifted with regard to the COVID-19 pandemic, it's probably a most appropriate day for us to turn our attention to what we might learn and how we might take forward what we have learned in this remarkable period with regard to scientific endeavour and innovation, with regard to vaccines, and see how that might be deployed to the broader life sciences agenda in our country. And in particular, how what might be learned can be taken forward to inform and populate the life sciences sector vision that Her Majesty's government published a couple of weeks ago, and which will form the basis, the roadmap for how we proceed in our country in this important area, not only in terms of the welfare and well-being of our fellow citizens, but in terms of the economy of the United Kingdom in the years to come. So I'm most grateful for all of those who have decided to participate this evening. Now, it's an interactive discussion. We'll have short presentations, and then we will move to a broader discussion. And in this regard, I'm going to turn over to Gavin, our Chief Executive, who's going to now explain to us how we might put questions, how we will marshal those questions, and how we can be certain that we have an effective discussion. So Gavin, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, so we're going to use the Zoom Q&A function as we usually do for the foundation events. And as always, a plea, please use the Q&A function and not the chat function, because with the Q&A function, you can not only ask questions, but you can also vote and upvote other people's questions and comment on other people's questions, and indeed potentially answer some of those questions yourself in a discursive way. And please don't wait until the end of the presentations. Please feel free to start asking questions right from now. So you'll find the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Just click on that, and then you can see how to answer questions as shown on this slide. So I'll pass back to you now, Chairman.
So thank you so much, Gavin, for that. It's my great pleasure now to call upon Dame Sarah Gilbert. She needs no introduction in our country, a very well-known, highly regarded scientist for her remarkable contributions to not only the well-being of the citizens of our country, but the well-being of countless billions of people eventually throughout the world through her devoted, consistent, long-standing commitment to her specialist field of vaccinology, and of course to the development of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, but beyond that, for having ensured over a very long period of time when I suspect vaccine research wasn't at the front of everybody's minds, having ensured that we had a strong science base to be able to respond to this global challenge when the moment arrives. So Dame Sarah, over to you, if we may, to open our meeting.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to share some slides with you now. Hopefully you've got those up on your screen now.
Thank you.
So I'm going to talk you through my lessons learned in the pandemic, looking back. This is very much a personal view. It's not a polished presentation. It's something that we're still coming out of in terms of vaccine development. So it's somewhat raw, but I think that's the honest way to present it to you at this point. So I'll take you through what we learned from it. So the first thing I want to say is that partnerships can achieve great things. And what we had in 2020 was a new partnership between academic groups at the University of Oxford, and actually multiple academic groups, but groups that already knew each other and worked together to a fairly large extent, and a big pharma partner, AstraZeneca, of course, who licensed the vaccine technology at the end of April of last year. And I think that this is a very good model for future partnerships when we need to do something quickly, but also at large scale, because academia can be fast and flexible. We have many sources of expertise available in-house. We have networks of academic collaborators in the UK, but also in other countries, which turned out to be very useful. We could draw on these existing relationships. We didn't have to form new relationships in order to get things moving. But perhaps somewhat unusually, we don't just do the very early development of new ideas. Oxford has its own GMP manufacturing facility where we can make vaccines to take into clinical trials. We have a clinical trial centre. We have a lot of experience in developing manufacturing processes and initiating and continuing with clinical trials. And it was really important that Oxford didn't just do the early work on the vaccine, but by the 23rd of April of 2020, we had manufactured the vaccine to GMP, ready for clinical trials. We had all the approvals and the clinical trial started. Oxford then led phase 1, phase 2 and phase 3 clinical studies in the UK and in Brazil and South Africa as well. So if we're going to have good transfer of ideas from academia into pharmaceutical companies, it's necessary, in my view, to take things past the idea stage. If academic work is transferred at a very early stage, it often moves very, very slowly when it gets into a company. And what was different here was that we'd taken it a long way through development. We had a scalable manufacturing process. We were generating clinical trial data, and therefore it was much easier for a large pharma partner to step in and take it from there. Now, it's not going to be possible for every university and every academic group to have access to such facilities, particularly when we're thinking about other areas, drug development as well. But I do think within the UK, we have the possibility of maybe having some hubs in GMP manufacturing, also clinical trials, which will allow academics to get their early phase work further on in the development process, because that's what's really needed. And by collaborating together and facilitating access into GMP manufacturing and into clinical trials, we can actually get more value out of the vast amount of work that is done in academic groups, and often just stays there because it doesn't move out of the university lab and into the clinic. So that's something I would like to see more emphasis on, getting things moved further on down the development pathway while still in academia. And that also goes hand in hand with developing new processes and perhaps new approaches to running clinical trials, which are also beneficial. But there's, of course, no way that a university is going to be able to do the large-scale manufacture and also the global regulatory submissions that are needed to license a vaccine to be used across the world. So we really had to move from, in terms of manufacturing, from a manual, very hands-on approach to a large-scale systems and logistics approach, which is slower to make small amounts of doses, but is absolutely essential when you want large amounts of doses. And the two types of work together, the academic and the big pharma, was what enabled us to move quickly in 2020. But we do have difficulty in the academic groups in that funding has moved very much towards short-term funding, short-term grants, often only 3 years, which may take a year to apply for. And teamwork. Large teams who can do manufacturing and clinical trials, for example, were really essential last year, but it is increasingly difficult to maintain the teams when we have such short-term funding. And I think from 2022, that's going to be even more of a problem, because we're finding that we should be applying now for money to pay our staff from next year, and there is really not very much available that we can be applying for. So in order to keep the team together, we're going to need some creative ideas. I have to say that we did miss some opportunities to be better prepared. I had been working in outbreak pathogen vaccine development for some time and was aware of what was going to be needed if we had to respond to a large outbreak or a pandemic. And we had been trying to get vaccine technology development and vaccine manufacturing enhanced many times before 2020. I have always found, and my colleagues find as well, that it's never been possible to get funding to develop the technology that underpins the development of all the different vaccines that we then work on. We can get funding for specific vaccines against specific diseases, but to fund the technology itself, nobody was ever interested in that. And we had to do it by a little bit of work on one project, a little bit of work on another, and then we found some gaps when we tried to put all of this together. We'd also wanted to expand our own manufacturing facility, and that hadn't happened. We hadn't been able to get funding for our own plans on response to disease X. So although we'd had the ideas, we hadn't been able to put them into practice. And a major problem with producing the doses from clinical trials, so they were made by 4 different companies, each with a different process and assays. And this was a major difficulty that we had with our clinical trials. Our clinical trials would have run much more quickly and much more smoothly had we had an extended and modified CBF and VMIC already up and running, and then to pass on to a commercial manufacturer after that. And all of those things have been requested, but they haven't been funded. And then we really needed them. It's very difficult to work without those. Finally, having a clear and shared goal achieves much more than lots of planning. Grant applications are increasingly large, complex, and last year we went from concept to 700 million vaccine doses released for use in 172 countries in less time than some academic funding applications now take. Our plans were constantly being developed every day, literally. Budgets were reactive, and we did report actual spending, but the plans changed so often we didn't have detailed budgets to request funding in advance. The decisions were made by those leading the work, not by external consultants to funders who often have a large amount of influence despite not doing the work themselves. But the UKRI Rapid Response Scheme, I felt, achieved a good balance of information gathering and speed, which meant that we could provide an appropriate amount of information and receive funding to move the programme forward. And coming back to the teams, establishing and maintaining expert teams in academia should be prioritised over small grants which run for short times and make building teams very difficult. So I'll stop there because I see that the Minister has now joined us, and we can come back to this for discussion later.
Minister, we seem to have lost Lord Kakkar very briefly, but it would be wonderful if you could join us now and give us your remarks.
Yeah, yes, Minister, welcome.
Oh, sorry.
I hope you can hear me. I'm so sorry. It's our great pleasure on behalf of the Foundation for Science and Technology to welcome you to this session on lessons from the vaccine programme for UK life sciences. If I may just say that, of course, you're a distinguished member of the House of Commons since May 2010, member for Stratford-upon-Avon, and of course, Minister in both the Business Department and the Department of Health, responsible for COVID vaccine deployment, amongst other things. Minister, over to you.
Thank you very much, Lord Kakkar. I hope everyone can hear me. I don't think they can see me yet.
We can't see. There you are. Perfect.
Wonderful. My apologies to everyone. I've just hot-footed back to my desk from an hour-long session in the House of Commons. We made some announcements today on step 4. But let me begin by thanking the Foundation of Science and Technology really for inviting me to speak at this webinar. And I hope I'll have a little bit of time for discussion around the lessons we've learned from the pandemic and, of course, vaccine rollout, and how we can then build on these close government, industry, and academic collaboration so that we not only learn the lessons, but we create opportunities for life sciences going forward. I don't need to tell the audience here that this has been probably the biggest threat that humankind, that this country has faced in peacetime history. This is the most infectious respiratory disease that is aerosol transmitted that man has experienced. And we worked at pace and obviously formed a plan by pulling people in like Kate Bingham and Clive Dix and Ian McCubbin and now Richard Sykes as well, to allow us to be led by science each step of the way. And I would also like to take this opportunity to also express my absolute gratitude for the contribution of the healthcare professionals and organizations across our country, the determination of commitment of that frontline workforce, along obviously with the support of our armed forces, local government, and the great British public, has really helped pave the way out of this pandemic. I think amongst many impressive acts, both large and small, the development and deployment of vaccines has clearly been a major success story. The chances of finding a successful and effective vaccine were pretty low, but thanks, I think, to the brilliance of everyone involved, we have not one, but 4 vaccines which have received regulatory approval. I'm proud to announce that we have offered a vaccination to all adults over the age of 18 ahead of the 19th of July, today's deadline. I think this is a phenomenal achievement that would not have been possible without the vaccines task force, who really united the efforts of government, industry, and academia behind a single mission to find safe and effective vaccines as quickly as possible. The clinicians whose genius to develop a vaccine, and I know I caught a little bit of Sarah's presentation just now, NIHR for their critical work in supporting clinical trials, MHRA and June Rain for providing regulatory approval, that sort of flexibility to be able to take proportionate regulatory steps forward without compromising on scrutiny or safety and security. Manufacturing facilities across our country, including obviously Oxford Biomedica, Wockhardt, for manufacturing the vaccines at scale and pace, along with the collaboration of Fujifilm, Biosynth and GSK in County Durham, CPI in Sedgefield, who will help to develop an mRNA library, and of course, vaccine companies for working so closely with us to supply vaccines in order to protect our citizens and, of course, the rest of the world. And the NHS, which has been absolute key to administering over 82 million vaccinations across the UK, will also be absolute key as one of our, I think, important, I hope, attractions for clinical trials, for being very much engaged with academia and research and with industry. And the Vaccines Task Force success was not the only example of outstanding collaboration between academia, industry, the government, and NHS that turned the dial on tackling the pandemic. The recovery trials used the brilliant work of academics, the NHS, regulators, and of course, NHS patients to identify new approaches to treating COVID by establishing large trials at pace. The discoveries from the trials have now been adopted globally, and I think over 1 million lives have been saved. So in the midst of all its challenges, the pandemic has also, I think, shown that we can achieve extraordinary things if we think creatively and work together across organizational boundaries at pace and speed. And so I'm really delighted to inform you that we recently published, many of you on this call will know this, the Life Science Vision, our core ambition. And the vision is to take the learnings from the pandemic and the power of collaborations we've experienced and apply them to the quieter but also devastating diseases and illnesses that impact our lives. It's a bold vision, co-created with industry, with academia. It sets out our 10-year strategy, co-developed, as I said, between us and life science companies, medical research charities, and the NHS to build on that collaborative relationship illustrated in the pandemic. And of course, the underlying foundation is the excellence of the UK science base and the scale and potential of the NHS. The vision sets out how the UK will make a tangible set of targets to progress on all elements of the life science ecosystem, including science and research, building on our deep academic and industrial expertise to develop and trial new medicines and technologies quicker in the UK than anywhere else in the world. The NHS as an innovation partner, making research and innovation fundamental to everything the NHS does, which will drive improvements in care quality, efficiency, and of course, staff happiness and satisfaction, and will ensure that patients in the United Kingdom are among the first in the world to benefit from new medicines and technologies. Life science business environment, creating the best environment in the world for life science companies to start, to grow, and to innovate, and take advantage of the regulatory freedoms created by leaving the European Union. I think our vision identifies key healthcare challenges where we can harness the collaboration and creativity that was fundamental to our COVID response so that we can save and improve more lives. We will again take a vaccines task force type approach to these missions to develop genuine breakthrough medicines and technologies that improve outcomes in patients' lives. And I will return to the subject of vaccines to give you an example of one of our missions. We will draw on our rich history in vaccines, Edward Jenner, smallpox, and the milkmaid in the late 18th century through the success of the vaccines task force in COVID-19 to keep the UK at the cutting edge of vaccine development and technology, and I hope manufacturing as well. Modern vaccine technology was the potential, it has absolutely the potential to prevent and treat a range of non-infectious diseases. So continuing to advance UK capability and capacity in this area can have wide health benefits, as well as support the G7 ambition to have vaccines developed and deployed within 100 days of a future pandemic. To do this in the UK will, one, continue to improve core immunology, vaccinology, and clinical trial design and infrastructure, deepen our experience and expertise in vaccine formulation and delivery, and I hope strengthen and maintain the government industry partnership. Now, whilst there is still a great deal to do to lift the world out of the COVID pandemic and transition it from pandemic status to endemic, now is also an opportunity to reflect on what we have learnt and how we can do better in the future. That is why we have seized the moment to capture these reflections in our life science vision and to make sure that industry, academia, the charitable sector, regulators, the NHS, and us in government continue to work at pace, at scale together to improve and save lives. Thank you again for inviting me, Lord Kakkar, and for allowing me to speak to such a distinguished audience. And I look forward to a few moments of discussion as well. I apologize, my diary today has just completely blown up.
No, not at all, Minister. We're most grateful to you. I think, Gavin, could you switch on my, oh, here we go. I've got the message, start my video. There we go. Excellent. So, Minister, thank you so much indeed for joining us. We're most grateful to you and for your very thoughtful and thought-provoking comments. Yes, of course, you have, and much congratulations to you and others who have been responsible for the deployment of vaccines in our country with the NHS, with academia, with industry, and with other partners. If I may, I'm going to turn, because we only have you for a couple of minutes, to some questions. And Dame Sarah, ahead of your arrival, and indeed others on the call, have raised the question of how we're going to ensure that we have the skills and the workforce to apply more broadly across the life sciences sector in the future. What we have learnt from this remarkable period in our national history, and in particular, how we can be clear that we are going to attract into the various professions that are required for this great mission, those individuals, how we're going to retain them, and how we're going to develop their skills over time to ensure that we can deliver in the way that you envisage.
Thank you, Lord Kakkar. And I think Dame Sarah is absolutely right. And I see two things. One, obviously, our collaboration and the sort of the what began with the Office for Life Science and the sector deals, which bring industry along with government to address the challenge around skills, that we need to continue and keep driving. But I also see a real role for the department, and I'm talking about BAYS rather than NHS. I'm obviously a twin hatter, and I say in DHSC, forgive me, not NHS, in DHSC and in BAYS. We should be the challenger department across government, where because we are able to see the whole economy, including obviously this particular sector, we should be able to model through what does this sector need, the economy need over the next 5-10 years in terms of skill sets, and then go armed with that data to the Department of Education, which obviously holds the portfolio and responsibility in the budgets, and DWP, to say, here is what the economy needs. How are we going to now work across government to make that happen? And that same urgency that we demonstrated in our response to COVID, we need to do the same thing, I think, in that ability to work with industry and across government to deliver the skill sets that are needed here in the United Kingdom.
Thank you very much for that very full answer. Just, Minister, if we made two other quick questions. I know you have to get away at 6:30 and we're at 6:29, so apologise. My apologies. In terms of the broader vision that you've described for life sciences, which is very exciting, how do you propose that the interaction, the multidisciplinary interaction, beyond, let us say, the traditional partners, but into the physical sciences, behavioural sciences, and so on, is achieved? Without it, we're not going to really maximise potential. We've seen in the pandemic how all of these disciplines are critical. Our infrastructure deals with some of the disciplines, but not all of them.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And I will not claim or flannel this audience by saying we've got all the answers in government. The one lesson we learned through this pandemic is actually the success came through making ourselves accessible. I'll never forget Steve Bates coming into my office and saying, you really should take a close look at what this team in Oxford are doing rapidly. And I was able to sort of play a tiny role in escalating that message or cascading it across government. So I think part of the answer will lay will lie in how we are able to pull different strands together and take the learnings of VTF and see whether we can apply those to the life science vision. And again, part of it is by making ourselves accessible and being open to put ourselves outside our comfort zones. You know, sometimes the challenge in government, you have some tremendous human beings working in government, in civil service, and of course, I hope in ministerial roles, you will agree. But you know, we all have our day jobs, and it's very hard sometimes when it's forced upon you by a pandemic. Then you have no choice. But actually, beyond that, you know, the one thing that I want us to keep is that sort of DNA of when we move to peacetime. I hope when we transition this virus from pandemic status to endemic, that we don't lose that same level of urgency that we want to deliver for you know, the stuff that's in the vision, whether it's on cancer or dementia or any other area.
And finally, Minister, I know you have to go now, but very quickly, we have, in addition to all the science and technology and innovation in our country, and I know you're deeply committed in this particular area, also in parallel being conscious of the ethics that attend life science development, technology and advancement in terms of ensuring our ability to contribute to those questions and adoption at pace and scale for the benefit of humanity generally. How would you see the life sciences vision contributing to that element to ensure that we remain leaders in this aspect as well?
Oh, clearly an area of both clear advantage to us in that we've you know, had thought leadership and engagement globally on this area, sort of setting the rules of the road, as I call them, and then allowing innovation science to flourish. And so I see us having a really important role in this globally, and you get a hint of it through the Prime Minister and the G7, and talking about how we should be collaborating to build a sort of global radar system, not just for COVID-19, but obviously for other future viruses and something that he absolutely is passionate about, and I think is something that we have natural bench strength, if I can sort of describe it as that, to take advantage of or lean into as part of our contribution, but also I think in terms of soft power, it is I think a fertile area of work for us in government, certainly.
So, Minister, thank you very much indeed. I'm conscious that we've kept you 5 minutes over our strict instruction. My apologies for doing that. Mm-hmm. We're grateful to you, not only for attending this Foundation for Science and Technology webinar, but everything that you're doing for our country and the leadership that you're showing. Most grateful to you, and thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much, Lord Kakkar.
Very good. So if we may, we're now going to move on to, and I'm going to call upon Steve Bates, the third of our speakers, who of course is a CEO of the UK BioIndustries Association, very distinguished colleague who has made a tremendous contribution. We heard the Minister refer to his contribution with regard to, let us say, the vaccine journey during this pandemic. And it's an honour for us in the Foundation to welcome you, Steve, to address us now, and then we'll return to some further questions.
Indeed, Lord Kakkar, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you to the Foundation for the invitation to speak. Perhaps I should, as I'm probably less high profile than your other speakers, introduce myself and my role. And it was kind of the Minister to say that one of the jobs that I did at the end of February into March last year was take some of the asks from the Oxford team, carry the messages of the need for money to government and make the case very much on their behalf. And I think Sarah described her bid once as a radioactive bid for £2 million, and Sandy Douglas was asking for £400,000 for scale up. And one of the things I was doing in the conversation that Nadhim Zahawi talks about there was explaining that these are absolutely vital steps and vital, very small amounts of money in the grand scheme of what the government was spending, carrying them to government, and they needed to get on with it quick. So that was my small part at the beginning of last year. As a result of that, I was at the heart of putting together a consortium of BIA member companies who stepped up to support Sarah's team and Sandy and Kath's team at Oxford in the manufacture of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine as it became. And BIA members are at the heart, as the Minister explained, of the manufacturing supply chain for this country and now the world for this fantastic vaccine. My day job running the Trade Association means that I've been involved in life science industrial strategies or sector visions for the best part of a decade. I think that what I'm hopeful to do is to take a step back and look back on what we've learned from last year and compare them with where we're going. And I'm probably more of a salesman than Sarah is. So Sarah, I have got your book and I will plug it. If you're reading on the beach this summer, it's fantastic. Do read the Vaxxers book by Sarah and her colleague, Dr. Catherine Green. It explains the inside story of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine and the race against the virus. And what I was really delighted about your comments today, Sarah, were you talked about the centrality and the importance of manufacturing, because I think three things are vital that I've learned from this period of time. It's not just about being able to invent amazing things, it's being able to scale them and turn them into industrial capability that's vital in UK life sciences, and manufacturing is at the heart of that. The Minister talked about doing things fast and pace. I think pace is absolutely vital for doing things, and I think some of the challenges and some of the lessons are about how do we do things very, very fast. And the other thing that we haven't talked about so much, but I think is also important, is being able to do things at risk. And Sarah talks in her book about doing things at risk and doing things before the paperwork was all signed off. And I think that is an absolutely vital component, that many people were working at risk across many parts of the vaccine programme through last year. As a result of the work I did in the early part of the year, I was asked to sit on the vaccine task force with Kate Bingham and was on the steering board of the vaccine task force. So I saw some of that. And I think there's some other elements to the vaccine task force which will have a long-term legacy. One is, as Sarah's talked about, the ability to develop at pace and scale vaccines against novel pathogens. I think also we've done an amazing thing in terms of organising clinical trial networks, so as to be able to look at things like the recovery trial, to be able to work out how we open our medicines cabinet effectively at pace to get data that's meaningful for the globe. So I think that's another element of the thinking that we should look at. And also we've done some amazing innovation in this country around the functional use of genomic data to both understand a novel disease. Obviously, Sarah started, but she had the genomic information to be able to design the vaccine. But getting that loop right between how we get information out, the use of genomics, and get it back into the discovery scene, I think is really, really, really one of the other learnings that I'll take away from this time, and I think we've got it well. A couple of thoughts, if I may, that might provoke some discussion. The UK has been vaccinated largely by the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, but of course the other vaccines that have done a lot of the heavy lifting are Pfizer, BioNTech. Those of us with long memories will remember that some years ago, Pfizer endeavoured to buy AstraZeneca. If that merger had happened, would we have had both of these different vaccines being developed to industrial scale? I think it's a serious question. I doubt it is the answer. I think thinking about a diversity of industrial players who can be in a space, and what we need to do to keep a diversity of globally relevant companies at scale in areas of significant health need are important factors to think of. And there's some bleed across here to some of the discussions we have on AMR. So industrial diversity at global scale is an important thing I think we need to consider. A few factors that I think underpin some of the success, and then I'll finish. I think that where we've had success in the UK, we've had long-term institutions with research focus in the area. So if you think about Sarah's work at the Jenner, I think of the Jenner Institute as being absolutely vital, and actually not a very old institute, actually quite recent in its coming together in its present formation, but that as an institute and its focus has been very, very important in vaccines. The Sanger and the work done there on genomics, again, is another relatively within my lifetime organisation that's made a real difference. And the decade of investment under Dame Sally Davis in the NIHR, which actually underpinned the work that was able to be done in recovery trial and our clinical trial capability, means that it's been longish term investment with a focus in fundamental areas that have been the thing that we've been able to build on. I think if you add to that the fact that networked ecosystems matter, if you've got experts with high trust levels who've worked together before, and I think Kath brings this out in the book very clearly with the trusted relationship she had working with Paul and others in the UK life science ecosystem to be able to scale rapidly. We didn't have VMIC, it's still not built and it's still not manufacturing. So we had to go with what we could go with. And I think, having diversity in that base with companies stepping forward and themselves taking risk is really, really important. Speed I've talked of is vital, and accepting and carrying risk is vital. The state has supported industrial strategy in life science, and I think where we've had industrial strategy, championed by David Willits many years ago, we have been able to then pull on that investment to be able to divert from perhaps the central thing they were doing. You think about Oxford Biomedica as a company doing cell and gene therapy, they have been able to re-roll into something slightly different at pace and scale with transferable skills and people. And it's often about people and networks that I think is the most important thing we need to take away from this. Having that and helping government understand that as they think through is going to be the key thing going forward. With that, Lord Kakkar, I'll hand back to you and I look forward to the discussion.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Steve. Most kind of you to have made such a thoughtful contribution to this discussion. And there's a lot to pick up on here. We have about 15 minutes left together and a large number of questions coming in on our Q&A and voting system. So the first, Dame Sarah and Steve, is a question about whether the life sciences vision that we've heard about in the minister's presentation is actually going to be deliverable in terms of the amount of money that needs to be spent across the different domains and disciplines of focus, and in terms of having the human resource available in our country to deliver it. I don't know, Dame Sarah, whether you would like to start.
Well, I'm not going to be able to comment on the amounts of money that are needed. I'm not familiar with the budget that's been proposed, but I do think that we need to make sure that we have the right teams of people with the right skills in place. We were lucky to be able to draw on that to quite a large extent last year, but we still need more people. And vaccine manufacturing is so important. It tends to get overlooked in all the work that we did on the clinical trials. There's a lot of emphasis on the early stage, the discovery work, which was actually repeating work that we'd done previously. So we had a template to follow, we're able to go quickly. And then the clinical trials obviously are a major undertaking, but in between there's the vaccine manufacturing and all the regulatory applications that you cannot move into clinical trials without that. And it really requires a lot of specialist expertise, which we're unusually fortunate to have in an academic setting, but we need more of it in more academic manufacturing facilities for drugs as well as vaccines. And so we need to build that skills base and make sure we've got the skills that you don't often find in academia to work to GMP, not just to work in a research lab. And then I don't see that being needed in every university, but when we have hubs, and the VMIC will be one of those hubs, maybe we need more than just VMIC. Having collections of people who are able to take things from the discovery stage into GMP so that they can then go into clinical trials is what we're going to need if we're going to develop more products and develop them quickly.
So Steve, how do we ensure that we achieve this resource? You're very good at negotiating with government, clearly, ensuring that the case is made with a broader bioindustry focus, which, as you're demonstrated, includes not only industry, but also academia. How do we achieve this resource? Are you confident that the life sciences vision is going to be able to mobilize that resource, both from private and public funds?
It's certainly a big part in helping make the case. I mean, I think one of the things that this experience has shown is that the the strength in depth of the UK life science offer and our ability to work together is attractive, I hope, to the public. And I think the public can see the benefit of this now in a way that perhaps was less clear, and people like Sarah leading that line and it becoming a public discourse is really, really, really important to attract societal support for investment in this space. So I think the case is made more clearly. But I think also we can leverage in a lot of private sector investment into this space. We shouldn't only look to government. There's quite a lot of people who will want to invest in healthcare. We've seen significant investment from global players in Fujifilm in the Northeast, for instance, and I think that there is an understanding that there is going to be a need for more strength in this capacity. I suppose my question to Sarah is, we don't need necessarily all of this to be in academic settings. I mean, we've got some fantastic companies, and what's interesting from my perspective is how much fantastic science, and particularly this science in bioprocessing, is done in companies. I think that we shouldn't be shy about saying you can have an excellent scientific career, not necessarily in an academic setting. But what's amazing is when you get the academics and the companies who've got some of this working together, as Kath's chapter in your book has worked fantastically on this one. So I think it's right that, and it's fantastic that Oxford have got the facility that they've got. I think it's brilliant that we've got VMIC coming, but I think we shouldn't underestimate the scientific prowess and the capability to solve problems that we see in some great companies that have got a significant footprint in the UK.
Do you think there's an appropriate, let us say, exchange and interface between academia and industry and small companies and commercial investment and public investment to achieve the ambition with regard to the scale and broad base of resources that you speak to in terms of being able to deliver the research agenda?
Well, I don't think it's a research agenda. I think it is a delivering on a health agenda for the globe. So I think the mistake is to think of this as a research agenda. I think this is about thinking about it as an outcome, with health outcomes, and that's really where you get the mission, which everybody can buy into. I think if it's purely seen as a research agenda, we think about it wrongly, and we invest in the wrong skill sets, and we probably don't end up with the right institutions that can deliver, because the incentives are different. But I think there is great interfaces, and one I would say that's vitally important is the bar at the UK Bioprocessing Conference, because oddly it's where trust relationships build, and that's why Kath was able to pick up the phone to people in a number of companies to be able to get those crucial steps going. And Sarah talked about the not having standardized assays as being problematic, and it'd be great if we had one at the beginning. I mean, that is the joy and challenge of innovation in this space. I think it's great that we had several shots on target, because if you don't have those shots on target, you don't quite know whether you're going to get there. And some of the innovative steps that Kath was pioneering with didn't come off this time round. And that's right. We do need to encourage that, because that is ultimately how you get these things to move faster.
But Sarah, do you feel that there is the flexibility and the opportunity for the interface across all these different domains for us to be able to deliver the health agenda, rather than to focus on what might be more traditionally seen as the role of universities in terms of driving the research agenda, both basic science, translational and clinical research?
I think we need to make more of the opportunities to work across the different sectors. We haven't talked so much about the small companies. Small companies often have a really good core team, but then don't have the access to facilities to develop further. And that's where interactions between academia and the kind of manufacturing groups that I would like to see more of in the UK can actually be really beneficial. And it doesn't have to be that the ideas spring from academics and then get developed by somebody else. Sometimes they could come from a small company who then wants to tap into the expertise of an academic group to help them move on to the next stage. I think we should be maybe looking a bit more flexibly about how these relationships can work, and being also prepared to have larger groups working together. We have to consider the intellectual property requirements as well, which complicates matters. But I think it would be good if we had more of a team approach across academics, small companies, and then sometimes large companies, supported by infrastructure within the country that all can tap into.
Do you think it's possible for our scientists, clinical scientists and others, to move between industry and academia and the health service seamlessly, so that they can be both developed and then deliver their talents and skills across these different domains at different stages in their careers and their contribution?
I think it's something that could happen. It doesn't happen very much at the moment. So I did work for a biotech company for 4 years before I came to Oxford. And that was a good experience, and I learned a lot from it, things that I still go back to things that I learned then working in biotech. The reason I left was because the company was being sold by its parent company, the research was being cut back on, and I wanted to get back to research, so I came back to academia and found enough to interest me ever since. But so I think in small companies there's often a lot more movement between different companies because things are more transient, but I don't see why we couldn't also have more movement between academic small companies and large companies in order to keep things moving and keep the skill base developing.
Yeah, I think there's some really interesting schemes that I think are in the strategies to try and encourage this, and it's fantastic to see the experiences of people who do work at those interfaces. So there's some good schemes from the Academy of Medical Sciences to encourage that. I think the Royal Society have some things that enable people to try before you buy, if you like, and have a day a week in places. And I think I see with some of the younger researchers that I see a greater flexibility and a desire to try and to do it in many different formats across their career. I think we need to make sure that people are aware that it's possible. And I'm actually trying to go the other way, Sarah. I'm trying to find an academic partner who will have me, because I left university a long time ago. I feel like I don't know the space very well. So I'm trying to go the other way. And if you know anybody, or anybody on this call knows anybody who wants to have me come to their academic group a day a week for a year, I'm keen to
I suspect you're going to be overwhelmed. Let's move on to the question of zoonotic infection and human and animal infection, and whether there are both the funding and the willingness to look at platform technologies that are going to help us prepare better for the next zoonotic pandemic, bearing in mind both human and animal health.
Yeah, this has been a problem for a long time because there are very many zoonotic infections, but there is not the money to develop the vaccines for livestock. We can use the same platform technology in humans and in livestock. We don't necessarily need the same manufacturing process because we need it extremely highly purified for clinical use, but it can be a slightly more rough and ready, less pure, and therefore cheaper process when we're using it in the livestock. We're not as concerned about the possibility of a small number of things being carried over from the manufacturing process. And we do need the costs to be low. But I'm not aware of schemes that allow the co-development of human and veterinary vaccines, and it does actually make a great deal of sense to be able to do it.
Yeah, and I would agree. We're going to have, I think, a period of time, I hope in the not too distant future, where we're going to have decent capability to manufacture at scale. One of the things we're going to need to do is keep running at some level which is above the levels we were before pandemic, but won't be at the levels that are needed during a pandemic. So one of the ways you could think about this is there might be an understandable desire to keep out ready and practiced a community that can make stuff at some volume. One way you could think about doing that is, well, let's make some stuff for the animals. And the question is then, how do you set that mission up so that you're solving some of those problems and keeping the manufacturing gear running at enough readiness?
Excellent. So, I mean, it is an important question, and let us hope that we can mobilise the commitment to resource, because it is a very, very serious question. But there's another question here that has generated a huge amount of interest, and that is the question of global collaboration, and particular European collaboration, European research and European scientists, in terms of the program of research, Dame Sarah, that you have promoted. How much do you rely upon and give credit to that, and how much, how do you think you're going to go about being able to secure that in the future?
Well, we've always had many different nationalities in our vaccine team from Europe, from other countries as well. But there's been a lot of exchange with Europe, obviously, because of the mobility schemes that have particularly enabled that to happen. Also European funding, which tends to fund large consortium grants, which are great ways of bringing people together and sharing expertise, learning about different research groups across Europe. And I've taken part in some of those large grants, which currently we are coming to the end of. So we do need to make sure that we can maintain mobility of staff. People tend to come on the whole for fairly short periods of time and then often go back to their home country, but maintain the collaboration. And this is a really great way of getting scientific collaborations around the world. It's going to be very difficult if we don't have that continued influx of skilled researchers coming to us to work with us and then continuing to collaborate with us on a long-term basis.
Steve, anything to add there?
Industry is global in nature, and supply chains are definitely international. And certainly, if you think about it, there's a European supply community that's been built over 40 years. I mean, I agree with Sarah. I think access to talent. I mean, we need to inspire people from around the world and hopefully from around the country to go into our industry and into our sector. I think I hope that we can attract as many people and partner with people in the global south as we can in Europe. And the key thing for me is, particularly if vaccine manufacturing gets closer to those things, you know, there is lots of this that can be done. But yeah, it's absolutely right. This is what we mustn't do, is pretend that this was done sort of within a national boundary. And if you look at the vital role that Advent played in scaling some of the manufacture, or how UK people went to help the Helix plant get up to yield values, the reality is that this was always done beyond national boundaries. Although obviously some of the procurement is fundamentally tied up to UK government or other institutions that are important to take account of.
Well, look, thank you very much. I'd like to thank our speakers this evening, Minister Zahawi, Professor Dame Sarah Gilbert, and Steve Bates, for remarkable contributions. Most grateful to you all. It's been a very interesting topic. We could have discussed it for hours to come. There is so much to learn from the remarkable journey that you have all been on, and the remarkable contributions that you have made to the people of our country and globally, and much that we must take from those experiences and try and embed in the vision for life sciences in our country. This is the last event in terms of Foundation's programme for this academic session. The recording from today's webinar will be up on our website tomorrow, and we'll reconvene in October, where we will start to hold hybrid events in person and online. The first event of the autumn programme will be on the 13th of October, when we're going to discuss the government's innovation strategy, joined by the Secretary of State, Kwasi Kwarteng, with a number of other speakers. We look forward to welcoming you all then, and in the meantime, thank you to our marvellous panel, to all of you for contributing, and I wish you all a very happy summer. Thank you very much indeed.